June 15th, I don't know, 2022. This is the I-205 Diversion Subcommittee, and let the record show that I don't even know who's on this meeting today. So welcome to all the attendees and our friends. I'm doing a great job. Thanks, Trent. So with that, do we have anything on the order other than just jumping right into our presentation? Looking around the room for any hands or anything going on, and I'm just saying, let's just jump in. Show us what you got.
I think from staff, we do have a variety of guests here who attend this meeting, a lot of interested stakeholders, staff from a variety of jurisdictions. So well watched. Oh, here's our co-chair, Mayor Walters coming in. So you can take over, Councilor Sherman, once that happens, and then we'll give it to ODOT and WSP.
Very good. Thank you very much. Well, actually, why don't we do this? We'll do a quick introduction. I'm just going to call out names. Tell me who you are, who you represent, and we'll just kind of go through there. So I'm just going to do this based on my screen. So my apologies if it's not in a very good order, but let's jump in with Heather Wills.
Hi there, I'm Heather Wills. I'm the program manager for the consultant project for the toll project.
Very good. And Chris, you're up next.
Yeah. Good afternoon. Chris Wellender, and I am the transportation lead for the I-205 toll project for the consultant team.
Very good. Nicole, you're up next.
Hi there. I am the overall corridor lead for the I-205 toll project on the consultant side.
Very good. Kristen, I recognize you. You're up next.
Kristen Sacco, Tualatin City Councilor.
And I've got Susie down here in my corner.
Yeah, Susie Lassen, River Grove City Councilor.
And very good. Adam, you're up next.
Adam Marl, Oregon City Commissioner.
Very good. How about Paul?
Paul Comrie, Transportation Planner with WSP.
Very good. Mary, I can't see your video, but I can see that you're online. There we go. Hello.
Hi, sorry, I'm just arriving at home. Mary Baumgartner, Westland City Council. Thank you.
Very good. And on my screen, last but certainly not least, Mayor Jules Walters.
Hi, Jules Walters, Mayor of Westland. Nice to see you. Sorry, I was a little bit late today.
Not a problem. And of course, we have our amazing staff member, Trent Wilson. I won't let him introduce himself because we all know him. And Mayor Jules, I'm going to turn this back over to you since I think this is your meeting, isn't it? Oh, and you're muted too, so thumbs up.
I said you're always a good chair, Councilor Sherman. So you're welcome to take over if you'd like.
Not a problem at all. Well, let's just dive in here. So today we've got the presentation coming in. And I'm going to turn this over to, is it going to be Nicole or Chris who's taking the lead on this one?
I think I'll start us off. I've got the first few slides, and then Chris has the bulk of the presentation with the 2027 analysis. So thank you, everybody. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, Paul. So just a quick agenda for the presentation, where we want to give you an update of the environmental assessment, including the schedule and then the process and kind of schedule next steps as far as the EA and mitigation conversations go. Then we really want to try and spend the bulk of the time going into the 2027 analysis and then discussing some next steps. So before we go any further in the presentation, I did want to acknowledge you'll see some slides that are a little different than the version that Trent emailed out to you earlier in the week, and primarily the ones that were emailed to you actually are more robust, have a few more details in them. As we were going through the presentation, kind of rehearsing with staff, we realized we probably wouldn't have time to get through all of those details in this hour, and so we wanted to provide those slides to you so you can follow up with any questions. Always happy to take the questions after the meeting, but we wanted to try and condense the presentation for this hour today to hopefully be able to get through everything. So with that, there has been some recent changes with the environmental assessment that we wanted to update everyone on. So This has been a change for us too, and so we're kind of have been working through this process. So we understand this probably will come as a pretty big change to you all as well. So we're happy to answer questions here about this today, and then also, as I mentioned before, take follow-up questions and after this meeting as well. So currently, the I-205 improvements project, where we stand now, we will be including the improvements project outside of the Abernathy Bridge and the interchange improvements, which are known as Phase 1A. Those will now be analyzed in the I-205 toll project EA. So that is a fairly big shift from what we were previously doing. And this change was requested by FHWA in order to evaluate the environmental and traffic effects of the toll project, as well as the project that tolling is going to fund, which is that improvements project outside of Phase 1A within the same environmental document. And so this is consistent with the direction that FHWA is providing to congestion pricing projects across the country. So we're seeing this request be made in other places, and they requested it of us. And it does make a lot of sense to kind of streamline and have everything in one document. So that there was the prior I-205 improvements documented categorical exclusion, which ODOT and FHWA reevaluated in May to include then just Phase 1A. So Phase 1A still is covered by that DCE because it is able to move forward. Yes, and I apologize. FHWA is Federal Highway Administration. I saw that in the chat. Sorry, sorry for the acronyms. Yes, that the Phase 1A is able to move forward with independent financing. And so that is why it is still covered in that documented categorical exclusion, or DCE, and the rest of the improvements project will now be covered in the EA along with the toll project. I've got one more slide on that, and then we will pause in a moment for some questions. So what this really means is that analysis of the construction impacts of the I-205 improvements project, so the third lane and the other bridge improvements, so outside of the Abernathy bridge improvements, there are several other seismic upgrades along the corridor occurring in the I-205 improvements project. Those construction impacts will be included in the EA. There really will not be a change to the traffic and kind of long-term operational analysis that we've already conducted, because we were already assuming that that third lane was constructed in that analysis. So in what we call the build alternative in the EA, we were already assuming construction of that third lane. So we don't have to redo, for instance, the 2027 analysis that you'll see presented later today. Next slide. So schedule, what this means for the schedule is we're still coordinating closely with the FHWA to solidify the approach and work out a detailed schedule. But the milestone kind of targets we are working on is an EA release for the 45-day public comment period in early fall of 2022, so that the prior schedule had that happening in June. So early fall is what we're targeting now for the release of that EA. And then we would have a decision document, what's called a FONSI, a finding of no significant impact, in April of 2023. So really end of that first quarter of 2023 is what we are targeting. And then, as I said, we're working on a detailed schedule, and so we'll bring that back to this group and share with all of our partners as we have more details of that. Got, I think, one more slide here just to kind of go through the process a little bit more. So to lay out what's now happening between now and that initial EA release, and then beyond that to get to the decision document. We've got the complete 2027 analysis, and that will really help inform the mitigation conversation. So that's why we've not been able to really have those mitigation conversations yet, because we needed that 2027 analysis. So we'll go through that today. And then we are in close coordination with Clackamas County and city staff, and we will be providing them with a review copy of the draft transportation technical report, which is where that 2027 and the 2045 analysis is captured. It becomes an appendix to the EA, but is a very technical document. And so we staff will be reviewing that to provide early comments and make sure everybody understands the analysis as well. Then we will be having mitigation discussions with partners beginning perhaps the end of June and really working into July. So that is staff as well as transit, from city and county staff as well as transit agency staff as well. So I think we will be reaching out to schedule some kind of mitigation workshops is what we are calling them right now. And then after those discussions and those workshops, we'll do a high-level engineering analysis of the mitigation to determine its feasibility. So no detailed engineering would happen at that point, but just very, very high level to do a little bit of ground truthing and make sure that the mitigation would actually mitigate the impact that we're seeing. And then we'll review that mitigation with this committee, probably in the July or August timeframe. And what is agreed upon through those mitigation discussions with partners would be included as potential mitigation in the EA that's released for public comment in that early fall timeline. And then after that, there would still be continued conversation and refinement and throughout the end of 2022 and beginning of 2023, as we receive the public comments and need to potentially make adjustments to that mitigation, do additional analysis if needed, and then what ODOT is committing to would be included in that decision document that is set for April of 2023. So that FONSI is where those mitigation commitments would actually be listed. So I'll pause there. I know I just ran through a lot, so happy to take any questions now, and then after that, I'll let Chris kind of dive into the traffic analysis stuff.
Nicole, this is Trent. I think it's significant maybe to share, I think you'll do it better than me, significant to share what's different about that federal highways decision, what was going to happen with that lane versus what now has to happen because of that decision, because it changes a lot of expectations that have been assumed here for much of this group. And I think it's a significant one, and I didn't want it to get lost in that walkthrough there, which I thought was good, but just focusing on that, what was going to happen versus what has to happen now.
So what was going to happen is that the I-205 improvements project, the entirety of the I-205 improvements project was previously analyzed in the documented categorical exclusion. So a different environmental document. And so the construction impacts of that project were analyzed in that document. And so the toll project EA would not have analyzed the construction impacts of that improvements project. Instead, we were assuming that the improvements project was constructed in our long-term kind of operational analysis. So when we look out at 2045 or even 2027 at what is the lane configuration to do our analysis, we were assuming that the third lane was in place, but we weren't actually discussing the construction impacts of that project in our EA. Now we will be. So the impacts haven't changed. The project itself has not changed for the improvements project. It's still the same third lane and still the same seismic improvement. So those actual impacts have not changed, but we need to discuss and incorporate those impacts into our EA and have that documented in one environmental document, so that, again, the point being that you have the toll project and the thing that the toll project is funding, which is that improvements project, covered in one environmental document. Hopefully that helped clear things up a little bit.
It does. It's helpful. I think a broader context here is that it may require a few more regional conversations and decision points as well. And so that's worth noting for our group. That was potentially part of the process that wasn't going to have to happen before. And knowing how tough it can be sometimes to move this project along at the regional tables, that will probably be part of this moving forward. So that's a significant impact of this change too.
Very good. Susie, I see you've got a question.
I do. I guess it's a clarifying question. When you talk about construction impacts, Nicole, my thinking is that we would not have necessarily looked at diversion as a result of the construction impacts. We would have looked at diversion as a result of the complete project. So does that change the analysis, the traffic analysis associated with diversion? I mean, I guess in my mind, I'm thinking that we're going to end up seeing a lot more diversion during construction, but maybe that's a wrong assumption.
Well, I think so. We will look at, and we were always planning on looking at some of the impacts during construction, and as far as how there might be some additional diversion on local routes. And, you know, the improvements project, the actual construction schedule and some of the details of that are not known yet at this time, but they are planning to maintain at least 2 lanes of operations open almost at all times. And so that is what exists, you know, today as well. So I think that will be an important consideration in that analysis as well. So, you know, it's not as if the construction will, you know, have traffic down to 1 lane for extended periods of time that would, you know, potentially create significant diversion off of the highway or detour routes. So I don't know, Chris, you or Heather may want to elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, I actually just put that piece from the DCE into the TTR for the transportation report for the EA. And yes, the plan is they'll have 2 lanes open at all times, except there's some short periods of times where they have to install certain things, and they would do that at night. So, and I don't remember all the details, but I think actually the impacts for constructing, you know, the Abernathy Bridge were a little larger in terms of, you know, there were sometimes they have to close things down to slip the new bridge into place. But the 3rd lane was not as much of an impact. But anyway, that, yeah, it is covered. And, you know, we just kind of just recently pulled that into our document. So we will be explaining that in more detail.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay. So got a lot to cover in a short time. So this slide is just to give you a bit of context in terms of what we're actually studying here and in comparison to what you see out there today. So these 3 diagrams, basically the top one is the current configuration of the corridor from Stafford Road to Oregon 213. The middle graphic shows the improvements, the widening to the Abernathy Bridge, including the seismic upgrades. Those are going to happen outside of the I-205 toll project. Those are happening anyway. They're assumed to be part of our no build condition or future baseline condition. So that's an improvement that'll be in place irregardless. And then for the build, we're adding on those lanes that you see there in blue. So the 3rd lane, you know, between Stafford and the bridge, and then another lane on the north side of the bridge. And we're implementing tolling. And so those very light green vertical bars you see there are the general locations where the toll gantries are proposed. Any questions about that? Okay.
Actually, yeah, Chris, just one quick question. So the no build scenario does still include the bridge improvements. Is that something is that changed over time? I seem to remember that was kind of part of the initial conversation, was that the bridge was the build scenario as we kind of did our initial analysis.
I know there was discussions back and forth as to what was actually going to be in the no build versus the build. Heather, you may have a better recollection of the history of that.
Yeah, I mean, the no build originally was nothing, no project. And then when we were moving forward with reconstructing the Abernathy Bridge, we needed to include that in the no build because it's going to be there regardless. So that's why that is included there.
Okay, Mayor Walters.
Oh,
You're
on-
muted.
Is it just 2 gantries total?
Well, 2 gantry points, yes.
Okay. Gantry points are different than gantries how?
Well, the one on the south side of the Abernathy Bridge is going to be across the main line as well as the ramp to 43. So, and that's, I think there's some conceptual layouts of that, but it's still a single toll point. Whether you're continuing, say if you're on 205, if you continue on 205 past 43, or if you get off the 43 off ramp, either way you'll incur that toll.
Okay. And are there any gantries north?
There
of
are
the bridge?
no gantries north of the Abernathy Bridge.
0 gantries. Okay, thank you.
In this project, yes.
All right, Trent.
Thank you. Just want to your question there, Councilor Sherman, the build and no build, the way that's been helpful for me and our team to think about that is that's the build of the toll project and a little bit different from the build of the bigger project. And the reason that the Abernathy Bridge project is moving forward is because it received that financing commitment from House Bill 3055. That is a financing commitment. It's not a funding commitment from ODOT. And those are different words that we can talk about at a different time, but I do want to do a time check. There's a lot of presentation here, and I think just my recommendation supporting y'all, let the team move through these slides and then hold some questions for the end.
Perfect. Let's do that. Chris, you're up.
Okay, so we're going to review the 2027 AM and PM or morning and afternoon rush hour analyses and comparing the results between the no build, which does include that Abernathy Bridge improvement, and the build. And we're going to be looking at differences, changes in terms of volumes, travel times, and intersection operations. So most of this is focusing on the surrounding arterial system, not necessarily the 205 itself. And also we're going to focus on 3 different sub areas just to try to be able to maintain what's going on in each area. There's a lot of information. So the first area we're going to look at is the Stafford Road to 10th. And then, the 3 areas, Stafford Road to 10th, kind of the Abernathy Bridge area, Oregon City, and all the way up to Gladstone. And then the south portion, which goes down, includes Canby and Aurora. All right. So in terms of some real high level things that we found, and as Nicole mentioned earlier, we had much more detail on each of these things in the packet that was sent out earlier. But just kind of the takeaway from that was in this sub area, we're definitely seeing lower volumes on 205, except for the PM northbound. And we're actually seeing higher volumes despite the toll on 205 there. We're also seeing some increased volumes on Borland Road and Willamette Falls Drive between Stafford and 10th. We're seeing a decrease in travel times on 205, makes sense, because we've added that capacity. We're also seeing some reduced travel time on northbound Stafford Road, particularly in the PM peak, and we'll show you more details in a minute. And that has primarily to do with the fact that we've improved 205, which improves that on-ramp, northbound on-ramp. In the no build, that on-ramp was backing up because there's a lot of congestion on 205, and that was impacting particularly northbound travel times on Stafford Road. But Stafford Road, when you get north of Borland and particularly southbound coming toward the interchange, we're seeing some increased travel times. So we'll talk about that later. That shows us in the intersection impact. So next slide. So Stafford Road, so these are travel time comparisons, and we're looking at the AM and PM peak hours, and just focusing on that, the legend down there. What we're showing here, we've got one box that shows, for example, this Stafford Road, the full segments between Mountain Road and Borland Road, but we split it into two subsegments just to try to pinpoint where some of the delay is happening. And you can see here that, you know, the bold numbers that you see in those green boxes are for the difference in travel time. So it's the build travel time minus the no build travel time. Where you see a negative number, that means travel times got smaller. So things got better with the build. Where you see a positive number, that means that things got slower with the build. We've got longer travel time. So in this case, you know, we're seeing not much of an impact southbound on Stafford Road between the no build and build. You're seeing northbound, however, though, you are seeing a bit more of a impact, and it's actually a positive impact. You have reduced travel time, and that has to do with really the improvement at 205, which in turn improves that on-ramp, which in turn has less of a negative impact on Stafford Road. Okay, next slide. So I mentioned that we saw more volume on Borland Road, Willamette Falls Drive. So this is looking at the travel times, and again, the full length from Stafford Road to actually all the way to Oregon 43, where Willamette Falls Drive comes in there. We are not seeing westbound. You can see the total length about 1.5 minutes slower, meaning the build causes 1.5 minutes more delay westbound, and about 1 minute in the PM. So 1.5 in the AM, 1 minute in the PM. And I don't know, Paul, if you can point to those, but so westbound, there's not a huge impact. But when we look at eastbound, so go down to those boxes, we are seeing quite an impact in terms of travel time between the no build and build. So particularly in the PM peak, you're almost 14 minutes slower. And what we found is that the bulk of that travel time impact is between 10th and Oregon 43. And a lot of it has to do with just the spillback from Oregon 43. And I think we all know that that intersection, it's unsignalized, is an issue today and continues to be. And that'll pose some problems in the future. Next slide. So this is where it all comes down to how does it impact the intersections in the system. And I want to spend a little time just orienting you to what this diagram is saying. So for one, it's showing potential impacts based on the 2027 analysis and the 2045 analysis. The circles or rings that you see, those reflect impacts related to the 2027 analysis. And the triangles and the diamond, those reflect impacts related to 2045. And the colors indicate the type of impact that we're talking about. Just a step back, every jurisdiction has, for their intersection operations, has what we call a mobility standard, meaning a certain minimum operating standard that they want their intersections to operate at. And if a project comes in and causes that to go from meeting that standard to not meeting that standard, then generally that project would need to mitigate so that the operations come back up to that standard. So that standard is what we're using, and the standard varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and also sometimes from intersection type to intersection type. But so we've got the standards for each of the intersections that we analyzed, and we analyzed 50 intersections throughout the study area, both in the morning and afternoon rush hour times. So I'm going to start out with the red indicates those are intersections that in the no build, they were meeting those minimum standards. But with the build, they're not. So that we're deeming as that is an impact, which caused it to go over that threshold and not be operating in the way we want it to be. So I'm just going to, I'll go to which intersections in 2027 meet that criteria, and we're looking at 3 of them. 2 at the Nyberg Street ramps with I-5. So those aren't operating really badly, but they just happen to be just under the threshold, and they pop just over the threshold with the project. And then the other one is at Stafford Road and Rosemont. So that roundabout there. So that one did jump over the standard, or did not meet the standard with the project. In 2045, well, no, I'm going to go keep it 2027. So the yellow, we call that out because those are locations that were not meeting the standard in no build or build, and they get a little worse with the build. There's a number of intersections that don't meet the standards in either no build or build, but they actually get better with the build. That we're not calling an impact, but if they get worse with the build, we are. So we want to highlight those intersections. In 2027, we have 2 of those here, and those are both up on Oregon 43, A Avenue and McVeigh Avenue. All right, I'm going to jump to, and we do have some intersections actually that look like they get better with the project. I'm not going to focus on those right now because those, I mean, that's a good story, but it's not, we're trying to identify what the impacts are and where mitigation may be needed. So 2045, we have 2 intersections that met standards with no build, did not with the build. That's at 65th and Borland, and then at the 10th Street and the northbound ramps, which is going to be a new roundabout there. But note, this is a 20-year horizon. Those intersections are not looking like they're going to be impacted right away. So this helps inform kind of the mitigation discussion and the timing of some of those mitigations. There's also, there's 6 intersections in 2045 that we're not going to meet standards in either no build or build, but get worse with the build. And you can see, you know, 2 of them, McVeigh Avenue and A Avenue, were already identified in 2027. So that's a story that it looks like it's, you know, not working well immediately and continues into the future. Some intersections though, like Childs Road and Stafford Road, which was analyzed as a roundabout, which is, we know that's a project that's coming in there. That roundabout works fine until you get farther out into the future, and that's when it fails under, it doesn't meet those standards under no build or build. And the other one is that unsignalized intersection down at Mountain Road and Stafford Road. And then there's one in, oh, thank you, Nicole. I had my notebook over my speaker box there, so I apologize. I was coming through very muffled. Sorry. So 12th and Willamette Falls Drive also is one that in the longer term won't meet standards in either no build or build and gets worse in the build. So that's this sub area. I'm going to jump to the next one, which is, you know, kind of focused around Abernathy Bridge, but it's a bigger area. a few observations as far as volumes go. We saw more volume shift in the morning rush hours than in the afternoon. And in particular in Oregon City area streets, we saw volumes increasing. And on I-205, we saw them decreasing in the AM. In the PM, we do see some volume increases on 205 northbound and on Oregon 99E. We saw some travel time reductions on some local roads, and we'll get to that again in a minute, in the morning. And we saw some increases, in particular in the PM, across the Arch Bridge, especially southbound. And then down south, we saw in this, we saw Willamette Falls Drive eastbound and Oregon 43 southbound. So those are routes that feed into Oregon 43 before it goes across the Arch Bridge. And those are, we are seeing slower times. Okay, next slide. So here's Oregon 43. Again, looking at it in the northbound direction, we did not see a big difference between no build and build. But in the southbound direction, we did. And in particular in the PM, actually. And so that's about 9.5 minutes slower between Hidden Springs and Main Street. But the majority of that happens between McKillican and Main Street. And a lot of that stems back from the Arch Bridge and some of the interchange congestion around 43. Next slide. Then we looked at Main Street in downtown Oregon City between 15th and 99E. So we found, again, northbound, we didn't see a huge change in travel times. But southbound, we saw a more notable change, and in particular between 10th and 99Es. And that seems to be stemming back from congestion at that 99E and Main Street intersection there. So the other thing, just want to point out, we're certainly highly aware of the transit center in Oregon City and located north of 10th. So it's in that section that isn't impacted quite as much, but nonetheless, we're looking at that area in detail. So we want to make sure that transit can access that facility in a reliable way. Next slide. Okay, 99E. This was a very long segment. We split it into 3 pieces. And generally, we saw most of the change in travel time occurred in that segment between Arlington Street and South 2nd Street, kind of through the interchange and downtown Oregon City area. And it was actually somewhat positive. The travel times got a little less. And that's because there was a certain amount of travel time delay that was happening from ramp backups onto 99E from the 205 interchange. Those get better with the improvements, and that helps that segment get a little better. Other than that, there wasn't a huge change in travel times. But the proof will be in the intersection analyses, and let's go to that. Okay. So I think you all know what the red, yellow, and green mean here. So I'm just going to start with 2027. we have one location where intersection met standards and the no build did not in the build. That's at Dunes Drive on McLaughlin or 99E. And then, but also in 2027, we have a number of cases along 99E where fails in both, gets worse in the build. That includes Arlington Street, the ramp termini with 99E, 14th and 99E, and then just off of 99 Main Street and 7th. So, and then we're also seeing that same condition up at the Oregon 213 southbound on-ramp, again, where it gets worse. It fails standards, gets worse with the build. In 2045, we're seeing another intersection that's impacted. That's 15th and Oregon 99E. That fails in the build. It was working okay in the no build. And then a number of intersections that, again, failed in both, gets worse with the build. You can see those diamonds. A lot of those are the same intersections that were under that same condition in 2027. So we're seeing, I mean, what that tells me is that 99E is seeing impacts, and it's, you know, it's already in the future looking to be pretty congested. We're seeing more impacts along that. A lot of that stems from the interchange area. Couple other places that show up in 2045 but not in 2027 are 10th and 99E in Oregon City, and then the ramp, the on and off ramps at 82nd Drive and I-205. So those are looking like there'll be impacts later on, not as immediately. Next slide. Okay, going down south. We're seeing some higher volumes on 99E and on Ellen Road. We're seeing some lower volumes on I-5, particularly southbound. We're seeing not a lot of travel times in the travel time differences between no build and build in the AM. In the PM, we are seeing some slight increase in travel time, so more delay on Ellen Road and on Airport and Hubbard Highway, those parallel routes running north-south. So those are kind of the high-level observations we took from that. Next slide. And then just to jump to the intersection impacts. So we've got, there's 4 intersections here that we analyzed that show they don't meet standards in either no build or build, but get worse in the build. 3 of those, that happens in 2027 as well as 2045. So that's 99E with South End Road, Ivy Street, and Lone Elder Road. And then at New Era Road, that happens in 2045, but not in 2027. So I know that was a rush, but we got a couple more slides, and this is just to give you an idea of, we've been thinking about what can you do to mitigate at these different locations. There's a lot of things. These are some kind of typical ones. For an unsignalized intersection, you can signalize it, obviously, or you could provide a roundabout, depending on how much room you have to put something in. For a signalized intersection, you know, you can always try to tweak the timing and phasing. That's generally, we already do that. So that's already considered. But you could also add lanes. You can add turn lanes, you can add through lanes. to get more traffic through the intersection and hence bring it back to operating at that minimum standard. You could look at turning a signalized intersection into a roundabout. You could, very expensive option is to actually grade separate. And that would really only be at major intersections. I don't think it applies in this study area. We're looking at transit impacts as well. And unlike the intersections, there's not a real set standard for how we want transit, that we want a minimum standard that we want transit performance to meet. But we are looking at where we're impacting those roadways that transit's running on. And we're looking at what can you do to make that better. And that runs from really simple things to providing transit signal priority, signalized intersections, to adding, transit lanes to bypass congested areas. And then we're also looking at active transportation. So next slide. I know you don't have a chance to read all this, but both pedestrian and bicycle mobility and safety. Clearly, there's a lot of things you can do. Like if there's no sidewalks, you can add them. If there's no good crossing of a busy road, you can add a protected crossing, typically a pedestrian signal. You could add a multi-use trail. And same with bicycles, you can pave the shoulder or widen it and pave it. You can add bike lanes on the roadway. You could add protected bike lanes that are separated from the roadway, or a multi-use trail. And all of those have different costs and considerations. But we just want to throw out some of the things that we've been thinking about here. Okay, actually that was the end of the transportation portion. And I think, Nicole, were you going to cover this slide?
Sure. I mean, just really quickly, I know I want to give some time for questions, but we already went over some of this, so we're incorporating this 2027 analysis into the technical report. As I previously said, we'll be in touch with local jurisdictions and transit agencies to begin scheduling those mitigation workshops. And then something we've heard from this group is the need for kind of a modeling deep dive, or just more of a kind of a modeling 101. So I think Trent was going to help us coordinate that, and any interested members of the diversion subcommittee could let Brent know, or Trent, excuse me, and we can work on scheduling that meeting.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you for the presentations. I mean, anything in closing, or can I, if I may just, I'm a layperson, so let me just see if I can kind of pick up on the summary of the information. So based on the analysis so far, overall, adjacent travel times negatively impacted across the board, in some situations pretty substantially. Secondarily, of the intersections analyzed, the majority are worse and quite often very substantially, which is going to require a ton of mitigation. I mean, is that my takeaway today?
Yeah, I want to point out that all those yellow intersections, those, ODOT's still trying to figure out how they approach those, because if they're already really bad, and this makes them a little bit worse, what is the mitigation? Is the mitigation to contribute a percentage to whatever it would take to bring this back to, because even without the project, something would probably need to be done there. So that's one area. And a lot of those, and we haven't, because we haven't decided on what's the threshold, but a lot of those are like that much, just a little bit worse with the build versus the no build. And we haven't gone through and kind of categorize them by, this is really a lot worse and this is just a little worse. They're just all yellow. So I think there's some discussions there that need to happen. I also want to point out there's some locations where I think it would be really difficult to mitigate with for traffic. And it may make more sense to try to improve mobility for other modes than to say widen a street in through downtown Oregon City or something. But that again is discussions that I think that's what these upcoming meetings with local jurisdictions are for, is to kind of go through that, what makes sense, what doesn't. But
Sure. No,
yeah,
I'm sorry. Yeah, no, totally understandable. And I think, you know, as an elected, I'm just really just trying to kind of figure out, you know, so we've got kind of the impact of the project. That's kind of a thing. And then we have the overall impact of transportation. How do we fix things that are going to fail at this level or fail at this level? And so, you know, I'm just trying to kind of figure out what levers do we have, what resources do we have, and then are we making it better or worse in the near term, and then how do we address that? So that's, you know, so do these models all take into account population changes over time as well? Is that kind of baked into the model? It is. Okay, good.
it is, you know,
Okay.
and that's anyone's guess, but yeah, we've got projections for that. I do want to point out one takeaway, at least I got from that, was that when you look at those comparisons, there were a lot fewer intersections impacted in 2027 than in 2045. So I think that's worth noting.
Very good. Rest of the group, other questions, comments?
Hey, Chris, there's a question on Borland Road and Willamette Falls Drive, proposed roundabout included in current traffic flow study, question mark.
Borland Road and this is
Willamette Falls.
There is a proposed roundabout on Willamette Falls Drive and 10th. That was included.
Okay.
But Borland pretty much turns into Willamette Falls Drive, so I'm not quite sure where that intersection is. But there were a couple locations that we had not incorporated planned improvements. One was Childs Road and Stafford, which we have now, and the others were Willamette Falls Drive and 10th, and then also 10th and that northbound ramp. Both of those are going to be roundabouts.
Very good. Susie, you're up next.
Thank you. I guess I want to make a pitch for looking at the detailed traffic analysis sooner rather than later. So I'm happy to go somewhere or review anything. If we can set that up, I would really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Very good. Mary?
Thank you. I just would like to start including as much public comment and public access to this information as possible. Speaking for community members who I know aren't aware of the aspects of this, and a lot of people aren't really following. And I believe there's a lot of people who still feel like tolling might not happen. But this all from a really kind of 10,000 foot view level feels like we're not being very visionary here with some of these aspects that we're talking about, making travel a lot worse for people generally. And I just would like us all to, hopefully we could maybe challenge ourselves, and I'm challenging ODOT too, to think in a bigger scale about moving people in a better way, because this isn't it. This is really a problem, and I don't know what else to say. Thank you.
Very good. I know we're getting very close to the top of the hour. So other questions or comments before I turn this back over to staff? All right, Trent, you're up.
Thank you very much. Well, I have taken out a few notes of potential action items, a couple of which are offering these sort of one-on-ones or 101s, if you will, with the team to talk about the details of modeling, potentially about, understanding those traffic analyses in general. This group is also an interesting group because y'all's job is to, in some ways, make recommendations to the bigger policy body. So one thing that strikes me, Councilor Baumgartner, is what you just said. When and where are those more public moments going to happen? And if that's something that y'all want to bring forward to the larger C4 body to talk more about what that looks like and how y'all work with ODOT on that, that's a good next conversation or something that we can talk about maybe offline for trying to figure that out. So that's a note that I have that I'm going to spend some more time, thinking about in the next couple of days. So thanks for sharing that. Otherwise, this is a lot of information, and I think this team, I'll just be honest with you, I've seen them this Monday and the Monday before, and they were continuing to refine this information so it was presentable for today. So I know that they were working on this right up to the moment, which means that they're still working on it. That's another way that I would like to think about it. So I'd encourage y'all to keep working with them. This team is ODOT proxy, right? They're working with ODOT to implement this. And so if y'all have questions for them, please work through me. I'm happy to share that with them. And then as y'all saw in some of the notes here, they're also willing to go out and meet with different communities in different ways. So that might get to Councilor Baumgartner's point as well. So here to help y'all, both as your C4 staff, but also as a jurisdiction that's impacted by this work moving forward. Otherwise, we will get ready for the July meeting moving forward if there are no other takeaways.
Very good. Well, again, thank you for your time. Great presentations. Always enjoy the information. Always like seeing the group together. And hey, we're moving the ball as best we can. So let's just keep moving forward. And I hope the rest of your day is a really productive one. So with that, top of the hour, carry on.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, everyone.